Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to share with you the books that I read in the month of March. Before we get into that, I just want to take a minute to plug the two book club books that I am reading for the patron exclusive book clubs this month. The first is Wolves of the Calla, which is the 5th book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. We are on a journey to the tower together. We're already 5 books in, but I guess if you are a fan of the series and would like to just hop in and reread one of the books that I think is quite fun, I just wanted to highlight that. The other book is the monthly drop-in book club. Patrons of a certain tier submit options and then get to vote on them, and this month we extended it to everybody in Patreon to see if that affects engagement. So Lord of the Flies is the book that was submitted and voted on by patrons. I never read this in high school. I had never had to read this, so I have no negative associations with it. So I am excited to finally delve into this and see what I think. A link to the Patreon page is in the description box down below. It's available to patrons at all tiers, so for as little as $1 you can join and you can participate in the live show discussions, and they're a lot of fun. They are some of the most enjoyable things for me to produce. Let's talk about the 5 books that I read in March. So I am about to talk about Chanel Miller's Know My Name. For folks who might find sexual assault triggering, I am going to put a number on the screen right now, and I will try and figure out how to do that number thingy in the description box so that if you do not want to listen to this, please skip this. So yeah, either this number that I've put on the screen, skip to there, or the description box down below if I can figure it out. The first book is Chanel Miller's Know My Name. Chanel Miller is the young woman involved in the Stanford rape case. She is the victim or survivor. I believe she uses both sort of interchangeably. She at one point gave a testimony but didn't have her name attached to it, and at this point she is telling her own story. She is attaching her name to it, and this was incredibly powerful and so infuriating. Like, if you want to be mad about how almost impossible it is to pursue legal action, reading it above anything else highlights how many changes need to be made to our legal systems. The fact that these things can last years. You can spend years of your life having to relive your trauma perfectly, down to the letter, give exact testimony each time, otherwise you'll be discredited. I mean, do you remember what you ate for lunch 6 months ago? Right? Like, and until it becomes an important day, you're not going to remember that. Like, maybe you remember like the super special lunch that you had for your confirmation ceremony. Like, it was a big party, like there's a big moment attached to it. Cool. You probably remember what you ate at your wedding. Like, your wedding. Not other people's weddings. Your wedding. Like, those are big things to attach meaning to. You probably remember more about those important days, but they're already highlighted in your mind as an important day. It's not like, surprise, Tuesday 6 weeks ago. Oh, it was absolutely heartbreaking and infuriating to see how, even with witnesses, 2 witnesses saw the act in progress and stopped it and reported it, and somehow Brock Turner walked away with like 3 months. Oh my god. Like, reading about how she processed this, the mental toll this took on her, I think it's important to bear witness to it. And I think that's what we're being called to do when you see this text. It's bearing witness to Chanel Miller's experience and the profound injustice that she experienced, and like so many others experience. I gave that 5 out of 5 stars because of how powerful it was. If you can handle it, it's a phenomenal read. And so that was a new buy. The next book I read was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. So this I picked up with the intention of doing a judge a book by its cover vlog, and then just decided to read it without doing the vlog. I didn't have time to do the vlog, but I wanted to read this text. This is about Mia and her daughter Pearl, who move into this community called Shaker Heights that has been engineered to be like colorblind and inclusive and not look like affordable housing. Like, it looks like rich suburbs, but each house is secretly divided into like 2 apartments. Highly regulated, like your grass has to be shorter than 6 inches, like, or you get a fine. That sort of restrictive neighborhood. Mia is an artist. She moves around a lot for inspiration. Whenever she finishes a project, she sort of uproots herself and looks for new inspiration. She has agreed that because Pearl is in high school, she will try and settle down in this community. Shaker Heights has great schools. Their lives end up overlapping with Elena Richardson and her family. So Elena Richardson is quite well off. She has this rental property that Mia ends up in. She has 4 children that are all born within a year from each other. Trip, Lexi, Moody, and Izzy. I guess it's about sort of Pearl becoming friends with them, setting down roots, and Mia also setting down roots, becoming vulnerable and involved in the adoption trial for one of her coworkers named Bibi, who gave up her daughter Mei Ling when she couldn't care for her and she had postpartum depression. She was not supported at all. And she's been adopted by a white family that Elena Richardson knows. It's kind of like a perfect mess. Like, it's a perfect drama. There's enough going on that it isn't drama for drama's sake. Like, you know how in things like Riverdale, like teen dramas, all of a sudden Chad Michael Murray is harvesting organs and you're like, what? They were just pulling twists out of a hat that day in the writer's room, right? I really enjoyed the adaptation. I think the adaptation did some things that made it make more sense. There were certain things that I think in this text were left fairly open-ended, fairly ambiguous. The TV show very much took a stance, took a side. I enjoyed both. And I mean, given that I picked this up because I find the cover repulsive. I do not like this color combination. It looks messy to me. I don't love the orange and white penguin spine. Everything about this is like a turnoff, and yet I loved it. This is my second book by Celeste Ng. Back in October, I believe, I read Everything I Never Told You. I prefer Little Fires Everywhere. I think it's more satisfying. I gave this book, at the time when I wrote my little review, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and I feel like that's too harsh. I think now that I've sat with it and I've experienced the story in a different format and compared it to the book, I think this is a 4-star book. It's not like a new favorite, it's not one I'm itching to reread, but it's definitely like beautifully written, well crafted. I really liked the conversations I ended up having about the book. I can definitely see myself rereading it. That was for my TBR. I've had this sitting on my TBR for a while now. The next book makes me so sad. Return of the Trickster by Eden Robinson was one of my most anticipated releases of 2021. I have been waiting for this for what feels like forever. It's really not that long, but it feels like forever because I loved the first 2 books in this trilogy. So this is the story of Jared, who is a young Indigenous boy. Editing Emily again. I need to be better about not using the blanket term Indigenous. I need to get better about specificity. Jared is a Haisla teenager. Haisla are an amalgamation of 2 bands, the Kitimat people of Upper Douglas Channel and Devastation Channel, and the Kitlope people of Upper Princess Royal Channel and Gardiner Canal in British Columbia, Canada. His mother is very hot and cold, very controlling. She's had some abusive partners in the past, and Jared copes with this violence and abuse by abusing drugs. There's a lot of like the real or not real game happening. Is something otherworldly happening, or is Jared just really fucking high? So this is the conclusion to that trilogy. and I feel like it was kind of messy. Without any spoilers, everything keeps getting weirder and weirder and more surreal. Like, Jared at one point has overexerted himself and starts vomiting up his organs, his like liver grows legs and like runs away, and it just keeps like snowballing, and you're like, where is this going? Like, how do I wrap my mind around what's happening? Because you just keep adding and there's fewer and fewer pages for you to deal with this. And the answer is, I don't think she deals with it in a very satisfying way, and it pains me because I almost wish there were more than 3 books. Like, there's so much world building happening that to limit this to a trilogy, like the epilogue felt like a slap to the face. Maybe I need to reread the whole trilogy. If I go in quick succession, one after the other, maybe it will feel better because I'll have been immersed in the world for like 3 whole books and it won't feel quite as like hot and cold. Return of the Trickster was highly anticipated and hugely disappointing, and it could be that like my own fault as well. Like, I hyped this up quite a bit for myself because I enjoyed the first 2 books so much. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was a new buy, it was a pre-order. It's one of the last things trickling in with my Indigo staff appreciation discount that I pre-ordered a ton of things back in October before I quit. I'm sad. The next book that I read was for the March patron drop-in book club. This was submitted and voted on by patrons, and that is Franny and Zooey by JD Salinger of Catcher in the Rye fame. This is a short story and a novella revolving around the Glass siblings. So Franny is the youngest Glass sibling, Zooey is the next youngest Glass sibling, and they have 5 other siblings, 2 of whom are dead. One of whom died by suicide not that long ago, like in the last 7 years. That brother, Seymour, is the one who sort of shaped his youngest sibling's education because there's so many years between the siblings. Zooey is dealing with the most pretentious existential crisis because she realizes that she's a hypocrite. She hates phonies, but she is a phony. And she realizes she's a hypocrite. Like, Zooey, I really enjoyed. Zooey was like tight, it was interesting. The gender dynamic between Zooey and her date in the restaurant, performance of gender roles, private and public spaces. Like, Zooey performs like, oh, I'm on a date with a guy, I must order a sandwich or some sort of food, and then goes to the bathroom and like curls up in the fetal position and cries. Like, that performance of private and public spaces. I thought Zooey was really interesting. I thought Franny was really interesting. Zooey is the novella and is long-winded, way too long. Did not need any of the stuff with Zooey in the bathtub for what eventually becomes of that little snippet of story, because Zooey is following up immediately after Franny's mental breakdown, existential crisis. I don't know why people love this. The Goodreads reviews for this are surprisingly glowing. Honestly, struggled to read this considering how itty bitty it is. It took me a good chunk of March to read this. I genuinely struggled to get through this bitty book. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars because once we talked about it in the live stream, I feel like I enjoyed the discussion of it, and that enjoyment of the discussion influenced my star rating. The whole thing reads in a very pretentious and phony way, and my question, I guess, is ultimately whether or not that was intentional. Whether or not the author crafted something so up his own ass that it's like meta and genius, or whether the surface level, like, he thinks that he's being really like critical and scathing. I have no idea. And I mean, that's not something that like I care to look into really. Didn't really enjoy this, and I don't know that anyone else who read it super enjoyed it. Like, I don't think we found a new fave in this one for anyone, but the discussion was fun. And that's always what I find with some of these books that don't land well in the reading. Once you start discussing them, you're like, okay, I can see something here, and that's fun. The last book I read in March is The Centaur's Wife by Amanda Leduc. So Amanda Leduc is Canadian. I believe she's actually fairly local to myself, if I'm not mistaken, and she is disabled. She spoke at the Toronto International Festival of Authors last October. I was one of the TIFA delegates. She was talking a lot about the representation of disability in fairy tales. This reads like, let me explain, but like if The Stand by Stephen King, The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, and Brothers Grimm had a book baby. So Heather is an outcast in a small town at the base of a mountain. She is somewhat outcast because she has a limb difference that results in her limping. She doesn't really fit in with her peer group, and she pulls away from everybody after her father dies on the mountain. There's local lore, local myths about the mountain. Cut to the present day adult Heather, who has just given birth to twin babies in a hospital the day the world as they know it ends. Meteors fall from the sky and destroy almost all of human civilization, and the folks that are left are desperately trying to form some sort of small community to survive the winter. And so you can kind of see maybe where I get The Stand meets The Day of the Triffids also. Like all of these plants that are non-edible, in fact they are deliberately trying to poison the humans, grow rapidly and like overtake houses and backyards and dead bodies, and like the nature is fighting back. The like forming of the town council, the deciding for everybody what is good reminded me a lot of The Stand, when our good guys all make it to Boulder, Colorado, I believe. They're forming this new community. They're going into the houses that they find that are abandoned, and they're just stepping into somebody else's life. That reminded me of The Stand. So if you like that aspect of The Stand, like the rebuild post-apocalypse of The Stand, I could see maybe you liking this. The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham is again an apocalyptic novel where 99% of the world has been blinded, but also these giant plants called the Triffids are alive, and they eat people. So the idea that like nature has come alive and is taking back the planet, that sort of dystopian element, that environmental commentary, again we get that here in the Centaur's Wife. And then we also get some of the darker aspects of like the Grimm fairy tales in terms of, how do we do this without spoilers? We can't. Just trust me that there are some darker Grimm fairy tale aspects to this. It was such a quick read. It was such a surprise as well. I read Disfigured by Amanda Leduc, which is a tiny little almost memoir. Like it's exploring fairy tales and her own relationship to fairy tales and her own relationship to her disability, and seeing herself only in the villains. After reading that and seeing her speak at TIFA, I just sort of auto-bought The Centaur's Wife without really knowing what it was about. And so when I picked it up and it was like post-apocalyptic, but also fairy tales and discussions around disability, it was just an absolute delight, and I flew through it. Even though I flew through it, I feel like it meanders a little bit. I feel like there were maybe like too many plot lines. There's like the Centaur creation story. There is Heather in the past and her father. There is Heather in the present, the lesbian couple who are running like the town council and making some really big calls, their plotline, the girl with cystic fibrosis who's sort of latched herself onto that couple as like an adoptive child. And then there's a bunch of random strangers with a truck in like the last 40 pages. And there were just, at a certain point, there were just too many things, and it felt a little bit messy. I think especially as we were moving towards the climax of the novel, the like ultimate payoff of all of this, to introduce several more threads into this braid, felt awkward. Even though I really enjoyed it, like I enjoyed all of the ideas, I could see this being a really great book club read. I think there's a lot to talk about here, and I think that there are a lot of folks in different genres who will enjoy this. I feel like the construction, like the narrative construction, isn't quite as polished as I would want it to be. And so I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. Like, I still think this is really good. I still think it's worth the read for the discussion. Those are the 5 books that I read in March. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on these books. Have you read any of them? Do you want to read any of them? Before we go, we have to thank my patrons who make videos like this possible. Thank you, patrons, for allowing me to set aside time to do this work. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoy and look forward to our live book discussions. They are just delightful. I don't know about wherever you are in the world, but we keep going in and out of like lockdown versus like slightly less locked down, and like having these live streams to look forward to is excellent. So thank you, patrons. I hope you all are doing well, that you are staying safe. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.